All right, we're here with Dr. John K. Lundwall. I'll read a little background. He holds a doctorate in comparative myth and religion from Joseph Campbell School of Comparative Myth, Pacifica Graduate Institute out of California. He's a writer, author, and lecturer, managing editor of Cosmos and Logos, Journal of Myth, Religion, and Folklore, and a founding board member of the Utah Valley Astronomy Club, a nonprofit organization partnering with state and national parks to run their astronomy program. And specializes in oral tradition of ancient religion. And anything we should add to that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on your podcast, Elliot. A couple things. Cosmos and Logos, the journal, and we kind of shut that down at COVID. But I am the project leader of the Utah Cultural Astronomy Project. So just on summer solstice 2 weeks ago, I was out in northeastern Utah surveying a Fremont fertility shrine. It's about 1,000 years old. But it's cosmologically oriented. There's this little shrine that faces east to southeast. That is, it faces from inside of it, you can see all the sunrises through the year. And it has one petroglyph carved inside of it, that of a vulva. And so it's a fertility motif. And there it is facing all the sunrises through the year. What's really interesting about that shrine is on the other side of the boulder in which the shrine's located are petroglyphs of constellations, the Big and Little Dipper. Very rare. Also had the standing monolith oriented to true north-south. And so the whole site, these ancient peoples, the Fremont are 300 to 1300 CE. They have just taken this sandstone boulder in the middle of this sea of desert, and they have aligned it cosmologically with their petroglyphs. They have little holes they've carved in the rock that line up to summer solstice, sunset, sunrise, equinox, sunset, sunrise. They have constellations pecked on it and this gorgeous little fertility shrine. So I was out there with a team. My research partner, John McHugh, is a registered archaeologist with the state of Utah. Archaeologists from the BLM help us. We have rock art researchers from the Utah Rock Art Research Association. So we have a group of people, a professional drone operator, Kevin Wellard. And so for the past several years, I've poured a lot of my time and resources studying this culture group because it's not studied. The ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Anasazi, they build Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, these big, gorgeous sites with huge pueblos and kivas, and they're all astronomically aligned. This is all coming up from the south, out of Mexico, Central America. And so there's a lot of work done, but you get up into the region of present-day Utah where it's a much simpler tribal group, the Fremont. They live in little pit houses. They're all gone. Everything's been ransacked. There's no writing. All there are thousands of petroglyphs. And every once in a while, a little shrine. No one's really done any work on them. So our group is recording them, surveying them, measuring them, writing papers. So that's what I'm in the mix of. But my doctorate is in mythological studies. My orientation of study was orality in ancient culture. I mean, basically, ancient myth and religion interest me. That's always interested me. I decided, well, let's just spend a lot of money and get a graduate degree. And I don't know why. I wish it wouldn't interest me because it's not a huge moneymaker. And so, but why did people ritualize everything? Why did they think the way they thought, and why did they do the way they do? What is the origin of mythology, and in extension, what are the origin thought process behind many of the stories in the Bible, for example? Anything that descends from oral tradition descends from a mythological framework. And so these questions really interested me. And so, so I've spent many years answering those questions, writing about and presenting on those questions.
Yeah, no, and it's something that I find incredibly interesting, where you have these mystery religions that were so widespread back in the day, and we know so little about them. Like, what happened, right? Like, Mithraism was the official religion of Rome at one point. And what do we know about it? We know that there's a guy that stabbed a bull, and well, what's going on, right?
This is an excellent example of how little we know, and yet these are big pieces of how ancient societies thought and lived and practiced. And we only get, ancient history is a 1,000-piece puzzle, Elliot, and we've got in our possession about 17 pieces. So I mean, I'm not being facetious. I think that's pretty accurate to say.
Yeah.
Out of 1,000 pieces, we're in possession of about 17 pieces. But these historical pieces aren't two-dimensional pieces that you fit together like a puzzle. They're fractals.
Yeah.
And what that means is that all this blank space where we're missing the pieces, there's something of that in the pieces we have, and there's something in the pieces we have in the pieces we're missing. And so through strict training and critical methods, historical methods, trained historians, we can construct models of these missing pieces. Now, my whole point in saying all that is the best tool to have is humility, because no matter what we construct, we're going to have problems and issues. And so we can't talk about ancient history in certainties, only in probabilities. And very often we're lucky to get a probability better than a coin flip. If we're at a 70, 80% probability, that's really good. So, I mean, talking about Mithraism. So, yeah, that's a major religion. We don't even know when it starts. It's 1st and 4th century CE. It's the major religion of Rome. It's the religion of the Roman soldier. It's the cult of the Roman soldier. Only males could be initiated into Mithraism, but they were concerned for women being initiated, and so they used the mysteries of Attis and Sybil to initiate women. But that was not the mysteries of Mithras. And we can tell the extent of the Roman Empire simply by locating a Mithraeum, a Mithraic temple, because they were built wherever the Roman soldiers went. And so there on the frontier camps, we find Mithraeum. The hundreds have been found. Some of them are very small. There's very little left. You go to Rome, there's probably a couple hundred Mithraeum in the city of Rome, and some of those are very grandiose. But again, when does it start? Where does it come from? David Ulansey argues for the first century BCE for its start. Most scholars argue the 1st century CE. So, we're within about a century of the beginning point. And what do we know? Well, there are no texts in Mithraism. You've got some inscriptions, votive inscriptions on altars, but they're very minimal. There's no text to read. What we have are scenes, iconographies. In most Mithraeum, there's some form of the Troctony scene, which is their central motif that represents what is happening there. And it's of Mithras kneeling on a bull with a dagger in his hand. His dagger's at the shoulder blade of the bull. And Ulansey argues the dagger is not at a killing place. It's not slitting the throat. It's not cutting the heart. It's actually at the leg, shoulder bone of the bull. His argument there is Mithras is cutting the leg of the bull. And that ties back into Egyptian cosmology, where the leg of the bull is the northern circumpolar stars, the Big Dipper. And so the cutting of the leg of the bull seems to be an astronomical motif dealing with the ritual that occurred in Mithraism. In some Mithraeum, there's this little pit with a grate on top, and it's clear that the initiate would be in the pit, and they would lead a bull over the grate and slit its throat, and the initiate would be bathed literally in the blood of a bull as part of the initiation. So there's that aspect that's revealing some sort of liturgical sacrifice in the Troctony scene. But the Troctony scene itself appears to be astronomical, which is really interesting. The Mithras on the bull is surrounded by all these figures. There's a snake, a crow, a dog, a lion, a scorpion. Generally, there are 4 personified heads in the corners. These are the 4 winds or the 4 seasons. Sometimes there are 7 marks or beings. These are the 7 planetary spheres. But so all that whole scene, it has an astronomical basis. The lion is Leo, the scorpion is Scorpio, the crow is Corvus, the crow that sits atop Hydra, the serpent. Mm-hmm. And so all of these images can be mapped to the sky. And so why? I mean, we are definitely in a completely different epistemological understanding of salvation and religion. The question is, does this enter into Christianity in the first few centuries? And there's not a lot of debate. I think most scholars would say no. I would argue probably in some different sects of early Christianity. As I mentioned, there's no such thing as early Christianity. There's early Christianities. There's a Bart Ehrman makes that point, that there are a lot of, every city had their own congregants, and they were reading different texts and had different belief systems, different leaders. And some of them were deeply Hellenized, and the Greco-Roman mysteries are part of the fabric of Greco-Roman religion. Mm-hmm. And indeed, Mithraism is the leading religion of Rome. It's contemporary with Christianity. Mm-hmm. First, second century, if you were to tell a Roman that by the end of the 4th century, Mithraism would have be gone and Christianity would be the imperial religion, they would laugh at you. I mean, that it would be such an absurd idea. And yet that's exactly what happened. So it's hard to predict history. In any case, I mean, I don't know where you want to go with Mithraism, but we with the Troctony scene, we are definitely in the middle of some sort of astrological cult. There's a controversial papyrus, the Paris Magical Papyri. It's 4th century CE, found in Egypt, and has different magical spells written in it. And in the middle of it is a section which Hans Dieter Betz, I have the book right here, the Mithras Liturgy, translates this. And his argument, which is very well argued, it's had a lot of pushback, a lot of counter argument, but it's also had a lot of other scholars pushing forward, saying, yeah, this is a good argument. And the argument that Betz makes is that this magical, basically it's a series of incantations, alchemical spells, but it's written on top of Mithraic cosmography. The Mithraic cosmos and the initiate ascending into the heavens to obtain eternal life. In fact, the papyrus itself, this portion of the spell, names itself and calls it the ritual for immortalization. And so the name of the spell is how to become immortal. And Betts's whole argument is what we're looking at is the Mithraic mystery, the ritual that has been transferred into Egyptian magical context. So there's an Egyptian oracle or soothsayer who's using the Mithraic liturgy as the platform upon which to write his magical spells. And so we can therefore use this text to take a peek into what the Mithraists were doing in their ritual initiations. And sure enough, it's all astronomical. The deceased dies, descends to the underworld, and he goes on a series of trials. He has to trespass the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, air. And each one of these trials is deadly. I mean, you have to know correct ritual knowledge and correct ritual positioning, how to journey through the elements. And then there are spell phrases used. Again, it's all part of this Egyptian magical context, so hermetic context. And then after going through the 4 elements, the deceased then travels through the stars. In fact, at one point he says a ritual phrase: "I am the son of starry heaven." And this is actually a phrase that is found in a couple inscriptions. "I am the son of starry heaven." And so, and sure enough, he follows the gods in the liturgy, but they're stars.
Mm-hmm.
It comes to 7 called pole lords, and these are the stars of the Big Dipper, the circumpolar stars, that he has to pass, where then he meets Mithras, Sol Invictus, the great, the father god of the cosmos, where he then becomes immortal. And so if the Mithras liturgy is a reflection of some part of the Mithraic initiation, then what we learn is that the Mithraic initiation initiated people to, after death, journey through the heavens on a very specific path that led them to a place where they could be reborn and immortalized. And it turns out that's actually a common theme in the mysteries. The Eleusinian mysteries, the word Eleusis is actually from a Greek root that means the way. So the Eleusinian mysteries initiated you to the way to rebirth. And again, scholars will argue, was that an astronomical way? But we have the Orphic gold tablets, a related mystery tradition. The mysteries of Orpheus and Dionysus deal with traveling through the underworld with specific ritual phrases to drink from the correct well of life, where one then can journey to the Eleusinian fields, which is oriented somewhere in the heavens. That's not here on the earth. In fact, the underworld itself, which is very often thought to be some sort of underground chamber, is actually located in the sky. It's the southern stars below the ecliptic. And the Eleusinian fields are the... Well, actually, that's a really interesting conversation to have. Let's have it, because it's really, and I don't get to tell anyone about this, and unless you're interested. Interestingly enough, you've heard of Copernicus, right?
Yeah.
Nicholas Copernicus, right? He's the heliocentric theory.
Mm-hmm.
He writes his book De Orbitum, which he tries to prove that contrary to the Ptolemaic system, Claudius Ptolemy, who wrote the geocentric system with all the planets orbiting the Earth with retrograde, counter motions. Copernicus turns out wasn't the first person to propose a heliocentric system. There were actually other people in his intellectual milieu who were talking. It was in the air, this idea of a heliocentric system, everything orbiting around the sun. And what's really interesting is that Copernicus writes and publishes his book near the end of his life. And when you read the history of science books, they get the narrative completely wrong. They tell you that, this is the beginning of the scientific revolution. Copernicus goes out, he has a theory, he does his astronomical measurements, and then he tries to prove his heliocentric theory. It turns out he had his theory way before he did any of his measurements. In fact, he didn't even know how to make them. So the question is, where did he get his theory from? And it turns out he tells us. What Copernicus was a librarian. He went around Europe as a priest, and doing paperwork for different nobles, all of which held the libraries, right? The nobles held the books, and Copernicus read a dozen different languages. So he was smart. And so he began reading in different libraries throughout Europe. And he tells us where he gets his heliocentric system from, and that's the Pythagoreans, especially Philolaus the Pythagorean. In fact, when he first writes his book, he names it Philoloca, after Philolaus the Pythagorean. And so then, so what were the Greeks doing? So you read the Pythagoreans, and of course we don't have any writings. There's Heraclides of Pontus, and there's Philolaus, and we don't have their original writings. We only have later writings describing what they were saying. And so we know about their thought from other writers. We don't have their original writings. This, is again, 17 pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle. We never get, very, very few times do we actually have source materials. But what we learn is that the Pythagoreans believed not in a heliocentric system. They believed in a system where there were two suns.
Okay. Yeah.
The sun in our sky, which Ptolemy was arguing was rotating around the Earth, and Copernicus was arguing, no, the Earth rotates around the sun. Now, what we learned from Philolaus and Heraclides, by the way, they contend that Mercury and Venus orbited around the sun. So that is some technical knowledge that predated. Tycho Brahe was the one who showed how Venus and Mercury was nearer the sun than the Earth. But the Pythagoreans were arguing that there is this eternal realm, and it's outside of the cosmos we see. And this is the location around which everything revolves. And so our sun and all the planets revolve around this central fire in the cosmos, which is the source of all light and life in the cosmos. And actually, David Ulansey, in his book on the Mithraic mysteries, picks up on this and says that actually makes sense, because in the Mithraic iconography, Mithras, who is called Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, the unconquered sun, is always depicted with Helios, the sun. Helios is the sun god. Mithras is the unconquered sun, but they're always depicted separately. And Helios is often kneeling to Mithras. And so Ulansey's argument is that there are two suns. Helios is the sun in the sky, And Mithras is this central fire, this second sun outside of the cosmos from which our sun gets its light.
Mhm.
A different way of thinking. But this is the cosmological frame that Ulanzi argues that Mithraism exists in. And it turns out I think it's right, because it's the cosmological frame of the Greco-Roman mysteries, the Eleusinian fields, the fields of the blessed, where the blessed dead go to receive their blessed life and or immortality, is outside of the cosmos in the eternal realm near the central fire. In fact, Pindar says that explicitly. And so there is this cosmology that actually this cosmology did not place the earth in the center of the universe. The earth was sort of this place where gross matter fell. And the point was to get out of this sphere and to enter the realm of the divine, right? And so this is the cosmology of the mysteries, and it's it's about leaving the realm of the material realm. I mean, Gnosticism picks up on this.
Mm-hmm.
They are, they think all material matter is evil, and you want to ascend out of the universe of materialism into the eternal ethereal universe. Well, it's drawing upon the same cosmology. You could say that this ancient cosmology was predicated on the soul. The earth was geocentric, but the soul was heliocentric. The soul rose up to the eternal sun, which was its source. And so the whole system of geocentrism was built on this ideological frame of the soul leaving earth and being reborn in the eternal heavens with the true sun, which isn't our sun. It's the central fire of the cosmos. So it turns out geocentrism is actually born from this theological heliocentrism. And yet that gets dropped. Aristotle and Ptolemy, what do? They turn it into mechanical material spheres. And then in our modern society, we've actually flipped the scenario. We now say, oh, we're so smart. We figured out the heliocentric system, but what happened to the soul? It's now geocentric. It comes from the earth. It returns to the earth. It's mud. It's clay. There's no eternal life. It's a reversal. And so when you understand that ancient geocentrism came from a heliocentric soul, and that modern heliocentrism has developed a geocentric soul, then you understand the difference in our cosmologies.
Yeah.
Thoughts? Did I lose you?
Well, I mean, I now wish I was taking notes with all my questions on that. So, like, kind of starting from the beginning. Well, here, or should we go reverse chronological order? Okay. First question was with the slaying of the bull in the pit, right? I was under the impression that was a polemic against Mithraism, that they really didn't do that. And I've heard that the higher initiates were all vegetarian, right? So you don't think an organization run by vegetarians would want to kill a bull and spill its blood on the initiate, unless maybe it's the Gnostic thing of, you consume an animal, then you are what you eat, right? But are we pretty solid on the idea of bathing in the blood?
I'm trying to think if the higher initiates are vegetarian. The second most common scene in Mithraism is the communal meal. Actually, Helios and Mithras will often eat. The scene is of them two eating a meal together on the slain bull, or from the slain bull. So I would have to, I mean, it's been a while. I have to go back and read. My understanding was that actually they know that communal meals were being had by the initiates because they find plates, bowls, forks, spoons, and food remnants. In fact, there's a profuse amount of cherry pits.
Yeah, exactly.
Which tells them that they're actually eating this communal ritual meal in the summer when the cherries are fully ripe. So probably around summer solstice is when one of these major ritual meals was being had. But there are different grades of initiation, and I actually don't know if it's vegetarian.
Sure.
So I'd have to look that up. As far as being bathed in the blood of the bull, I believe Klaus is the one that makes that statement. Again, I'll have to look that up, but that is from several sources. I think that's what they assume that happened. So I don't. I'm unfamiliar actually with the vegetarian angle on this.
Gotcha.
So,
all right. So we have, so with Mithras being the hypercosmic sun, right? I've looked at the Tractony. He has the knife against the bull, and then he is looking back up. And I've interpreted that like he's looking at Helios, kind of like, hey, am I doing this right? Like taking orders from Helios.
Right.
But maybe if Mithras outranks Helios, he's looking back and he's like, hey, are you taking note here? Right. So it's maybe a bit more like that. Yeah.
The David Ulansey makes this point in his work where the bull is actually turned in the opposite direction of the constellation depictions. And
from the outside.
So the perspective then is actually from the hypercosmic sun, this central fire outside of the system. And that is what Mithras is looking at. And so he argues that the birth scene of Mithras coming out of the rock is actually the same kind of imagery. It's a hypercosmic. That's the word he uses, hypercosmic perspective, where the link is between Mithras and this realm outside of the material cosmos, the central fire, where the principle of life exists. So yes, that's his argument. I think it's a good argument. Sadly, all we have is the Tractony scene. So I think it's a good argument.
Gotcha. And so the Mithraism is supposed to not represent like an earthly cave, but somewhere up in the heavens.
That's correct.
And do I have it right that there's often depicted in Mithraism a sky?
That is correct. Yes, a starry sky.
Yeah.
And some of the depiction of Mithras, his cape is covered in stars. It's clear that the entire context is astronomical.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's so many ways you can go with that, with hyper parallelism, right? Where, with competing with Christianity, and, we know a modern organization that, meets in a room with a starry decked sky that has different grades that you can go through, right? That's secret, right? Or at least has secrets.
Are you talking about the Masons?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's
and
correct.
You wonder, and sharing a meal is a common thing, not ritualistically. Well, no, I take that back. Even ritualistically, but you wonder, like, were the founders? I mean, this is probably outside your scope, but were the founders trying to imitate Mithraism? Because it, like, the parallels, with the sphere of the earth, there's Jachin and Boaz, right?
Right. A lot of the American founders, a lot of them were Masons.
Yeah.
George Washington was a Mason. Thomas Jefferson, I think, was a Mason.
Jefferson wasn't.
Oh, what wasn't he?
Yeah. He's speculated to have been, but there's no proof.
Okay.
No evidence. Yeah.
So I think, a lot of early American iconography seems to come from Masonry. This is not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
But so Masonry, and Masonry is a late, fraternity. Yeah. But it definitely is reclaiming some of these older systems of initiation. How they get carried through the Middle Ages is really interesting. You have the Rosicrucians, you have the Masons. There's these little groups, and actually some of the initiations that medieval knights went through are part of the same system, where they go through a ritual death and a ritual rebirth before they are actually knighted. And so you have echoes, and of course the whole Parzival, the King Arthur, the romantic literature of the Grail and Arthur draws upon this same iconography in Parzival, actually, by Wolfram von Eschenbach. He says explicitly that the Grail lore is astronomical, and that I'm trying to remember the name of the book. There's a really good book where it's written in German. I actually have it in my bookshelf. I could find it, but he talks about the etymology of the word Grail, the folk etymology, what the country folk understood the Grail to be, meant initiation. And so to partake of the Grail, the cup, was to be initiated into a mystery.
That's interesting.
And so, and then the motifs that we find in the Romantic literature actually have, some strange parallels of crossing a bridge, crossing a river. This is very similar to crossing the impassable water of the underworld that Gilgamesh and Heracles does, of certain trials, being wounded, ascending a tower, which to the stars or to the sky or to the heavens. You have these motifs, but they have been radically shifted and altered and then readapted and then Christianized and then put into Romantic literature. And so the Masons are taking pieces of this, and they're developing their own fraternal system with it. I think they really did or do. I'm not a Mason, so I don't know, but I think in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, it appears to me that they fully believed that their Masonic order would reestablish a higher civilization, as a lot of these systems of initiatory thought do. And so, I don't know if George Washington knew anything about Mithraism.
You wonder, or if it's just Jungian, like, okay, we're going to do something profound here, right? And it just makes sense that we should have the sky above us, and we should have a globe, we should have the celestial sphere, we should, you just wonder if it's maybe like in our psyche that Mithraism and the mystery cults were constructed from our consciousness, right? That we're maybe I'm going too far with that.
No. So one of the major arguments that mainstream scholars make with the mystery religions is our sources are late, generally centuries CE. Any argument for a celestial ascent into the heavens, a lot of them don't believe in. And they certainly don't believe anything like that entered into Christianity, despite the celestial scene in the book of Revelation. But I just disagree with this view. This idea of the soul being connected to the eternal realm goes back thousands of years. I mean, we find it in Egypt. You know, in February of this year, I had the pleasure of being in the Pyramid of Unas for a week. The Pyramid of Unas is the end of the 5th dynasty, 2300 BCE is when it's built. It's the first pyramid where the pyramid texts show up.
Mhm.
So before Unas, there are grandiose pyramids, the Great Pyramid, Pyramid of Khufu, Pyramid of Khafre, Senefru, Djedefre. They're mammoth constructions, no writing in them. The Unas pyramid is relatively small, but is full of special effects. And when you walk down in it, sure enough, the texts start in the passage that descends down into it, but that passage is oriented north-south, true north-south, and it's at an incline. And so from inside the pyramid, you are actually looking at the northern circumpolar stars, right? And it has been argued competently, and I was there actually to, currently writing a paper on this project, where there are basically 3 chambers inside this pyramid. The sarcophagus chamber, the central chamber called the antechamber, and then the serdab. There's these 3 empty chambers that are unfinished, no texts in them. But the antechamber and the sarcophagus chamber are covered in text. The ceilings are covered in stars. So you are meant to know that you're standing in a starry place in the heavens. And sure enough, the Egyptian entire cycle of rebirth is a heavenly journey, right? This is predating the Greco-Roman mysteries. And by the way, there are numerous Greeks who insist that the Greco-Roman mysteries came from Egypt. Right? This is not surprising. But from the very first pyramid texts, we are introduced in the antechamber. There are astronomical references. The south wall represents the southern sky. The north wall represents the northern sky, east, west sky. You are standing in a planisphere, and each text is a spell that helps you journey through the heavens so that you can ascend to the northern celestial zone, which is the same as the Mithras leg, right? You cut the leg of Mithras, that's your Big Dipper, the northern circumpolar stars, where you find the secrets of immortality. We find that imagery in the Mithras liturgy with the 7 pole lords. Well, there it is in the Pyramid of Unas. And now what's really interesting is behind the Pyramid of Unas is Sneferu's pyramid, is the Saqqara bent pyramid. And behind that is it's a little stone building, a temple, and it's closed off. There's no doors. But on the north side are 2 holes in the stone. And you peek through the 2 holes, and there's the statue of Pharaoh, and his 2 eyes are looking out the 2 holes. So they put a statue, they built a building around it, they put 2 holes, and he's looking at the northern sky, right? Well, we find in mastabas dating to 3000 BCE. So these predate the pyramids. Before the pyramids, the Egyptians were building these large stone platforms. They weren't pyramids. They had just these large stone platforms, inside of which was the sarcophagus chamber, the tomb, right? Well, in several of these mastabas, there's a vertical shaft that goes down, then another shaft that moves over, and then you enter into the sarcophagus chamber. Well, in several of these, that the shaft that goes down, there's a stone wall to the connecting shaft, and that connecting shaft is oriented north-south, just like the Pyramid of Unas shaft that you enter, and the wall has 2 holes in it, and they found statues of heads looking through the holes. And so we're now entering into prehistory, where the belief is that the deceased is journeying to the northern sky, where the source of immortality is, the stars that never set. And we have that imagery in the mastabas 3000, 3100 BCE. We have the imagery in the pyramids, and we now have that imagery in the Mithras liturgy, right? All the way in the Roman period. And so this is a 3,000-year time span. We can't expect the exact same cosmology or theology to be transmitted in the same way or be understood in the same way. In fact, at 3000 BCE, they might be practicing something different than Unas in 2300 BCE, than someone in 1500 BCE, 600 BCE, 200, 400 CE, right? So things are changing. Having said that, this idea of the soul rising to the sky is ubiquitous. You find that in Native American cultures. Unfortunately, so this cosmology is the most sacred part of these cults, and it's never written down. And that's the rule. In fact, if you write it, you get executed. Literally. It's so sacred that you don't write it down. So as a result, we have the pyramid text, but it's all spells written in code with mythological and cosmological epithets that you can only understand being initiated into the system. And no Egyptologist understands it. There's no common agreement as to what the pyramid text means. We can just say it's astronomical, and somehow they're relating the rebirth of the soul to a journey through the sky. We have similar motifs in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The entire Greco-Roman classical Greece begins with these Greek schools, Pythagoras, Parmenides, right? We don't have any. Well, so we have one excerpt from Parmenides on nature where he declares his authority to teach. And what do we learn? He journeys to the heavens to get his authority to teach. He gets a tour of the heavens, and this is where he gets his authority to teach the school that he teaches. The original schools are really just a Greek secular version of a temple, where the ancient rites, astronomical rites, were being practiced by priests and priestesses. Well, the Greeks innovate that and turn it into a school, much like the Jews turned their temple into a synagogue. And so Pythagoras is, again, we have no writings of Pythagoras, but the imagery we get is the same thing. He gets his authority to teach from the heavens. He's an initiate who studied 15 years in Egypt. And so, and then we can follow this theme all through the writings. In Plato, the myth of Ur ascends to the heavens to find the secrets of the cosmos and the secrets of rebirth. In Phaedo, we get similar imagery from Plato. Certainly in the Greco-Roman mysteries, this goes all the way to the 5th century CE, where we have Macrobius, Theodosius writing a tract called On the Dream of Scipio, where he explains the meaning of Cicero's Dream of Scipio, which is a heavenly scent of the soul. And so we have these large variations, but it goes back at least 3,000 years. From Egypt, Mesopotamia, into Greece, in the mystery religions, all the way into the Middle Ages, where it seems to die out. But then, as we just mentioned, you get pieces of it in the Romantic literature, the Grail literature, you get pieces of it in Masonry. It's just fragments. It's just little crumbles. But that's the source material. So,
yeah. And you wonder with Dr. Ulansey describes the idea that really Tarsus was the genesis of Mithraism.
Taurus, the bull?
No, Tarsus, the city of Tarsus.
The city of Tarsus.
Which, I mean, that's interesting. I don't think they're etymologically related, Tarsus and Taurus. That'd be interesting if they were.
I don't think so.
That I wonder
Yeah.
where we talk about Paul as the popularizer of Christianity. He's said to be from Tarsus, right? And you wonder if there's not similarity going on. Like he was familiar with the Mithras cult, and that do you think that's just crazy speculation?
No, Paul would have been familiar with all the mystery cults, I think. Let me, if I can find it real quick. This is from the book Mythos and Cosmos that I wrote. By the 6th century BCE, the Mediterranean world was rooted in mystery religions. Thrace was the homeland for the Dionysian and Orphic mysteries, which quickly spread all over Greece. Attica was home to the Eleusinian mysteries, while Samothrace and Andania held similar cults. Phrygia was home to the mystery cult of Cybele and Attis, Syria to Aphrodite and Adonis, while traditionally Persia was the source of the Mithraic mysteries. Egypt, Osiris, every major city that the Apostle Paul proselytized in was home to some mystery cult. Antioch to Adonis, Ephesus to Attis, Corinth to Dionysus, while Tarsus, Athens, and Alexandria each held similar cults. This close association between the widespread mystery cults and Paul's missionary journeys perhaps explains some of the mystery terminology found in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So he was well aware of the mystery cults because that was the religious tender of the day in the Greco-Roman world. This, I think, is probably one of the reasons why Christianity got so popular so quickly. In a mystery cult, initiation was extraordinarily expensive. You had to pay the priests or priestesses. First off, getting initiated required several days of preparation. And then the initiation, you basically had to rent the temple with all the priests and priestesses. There were several different things that had to happen. Mm-hmm. Sound effects, dramas, liturgies, right? Mm-hmm. Meals, probably psychotropic drugs. It was a big affair to be initiated in several of these different mystery cults, which means it was very expensive, which means that only the rich were getting initiated to have a blessed afterlife, which means, or you are going to slough off in Hades and just be miserable for eternity. That's not a very good egalitarian system, right? But it turns out, again, we don't know what the common Egyptian believed of the afterlife, but all these pyramid texts and funerary texts were for the upper classes. The pyramid texts were for the pharaohs. Then the coffin text appears, which draw from the pyramid text, and now the nobility can be initiated into the afterlife. And then, by the Middle and Late Kingdom, it turns into the funerary scrolls. Now, anyone who can afford one can now be saved in the afterlife, but still very expensive. So you get your merchants who are buying them. You get your relatives of the nobility, but the vast majority of people cannot afford a Book of the Dead to be buried with. It could be afford to be mummified or to have a system of priests or priestesses do the rituals, right? The vast majority of people in the Greco-Roman world getting initiated were the rich. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you had a slave master that was beneficent, they would initiate their slaves, but that was pretty rare. And then Christianity shows up, and what's the message of Christianity?
For the poor.
Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. They shall inherit the earth. Holy shit. This is a religion for me. Right? And so, and it just took over. Within 2 centuries, Egypt, which had this long, incredible religion for 3,000 years, suddenly was Christian. What there's a lot of critics that say, there's all kinds of Christian, that it was forced upon the people. No, it wasn't. Egypt had exhausted its religion, and it had become, there were thousands of deities, and it had become so expensive. and Christianity was the religion for the poor, for the common person, for the common man or woman. And that's why it's probably one of the largest reasons why it was so successful.
Yep.
It did not require, that we know of, expensive initiations. I mean, the question then is, did it require initiations? And if it did, what kind of initiations were they? And so now we enter the realm of biblical debate and speculation.
Yeah. So let's speculate. See, I wonder with, I see parallels between, I forget which epistle it was, but we have that, the Gospel of the magical document. I think it's sometimes called the Gospel of Mithras, if I have that right. The magical formula for immortality.
Yeah, the Mithras liturgy.
Yeah, and I was reading, I forget which epistle, but I see a lot of parallels between, and just maybe they were just common throughout maybe everybody had it, but like a focus on breath and breathing, the spirit, about powers, right? And I see I'm reading it in English clearly, right? But a lot of the same words being used, it's the same kind of style. I wonder if those epistles were kind of based off of Mithraism, that maybe Paul was an initiate of Mithraism. That's just wild speculation. But, we see in Mark, right? We have the youth who he's seemingly he's being initiated into the mysteries, right?
Right.
And he has that shield or the linen over him, right? Presumably being baptized, right? And then
this is the secret gospel of Mark.
Well, this is just regular Mark. But in
regular Mark has the naked. You're talking about the man in the garden?
No, although that's a parallel to it. There's the youth at the tail end, but or maybe am I talking secret Mark? Where there's a man that runs from a crowd that's trying to grab his garment, right? And I thought that was regular Mark. I'll see if I can Google it real quick. But you'd think that there's some ritual going on there, right? And when Christ is born, he's the same language that he's swaddled in the linen, right. Same language that when he's dead, he's swaddled in the linen, right? And then at baptism, you have the same linen, right? So you wonder if this linen, like we're talking about the progression through the ritual of an initiation cult, and Paul, I forget which epistle, says, as we know that when we're baptized, we die with Christ, which is an odd thing to say, unless maybe he's hinting at, as you know, in our initiation ritual, right, that the baptism is equal to the death of Christ that we partake in, right?
I'll just come I'll just come out and say I think it's impossible to innovate a brand. So religion is the process of transmission, adaptation, and innovation. You never get a religion that's brand new, unassociated with any of the cultural context surrounding it. Mm-hmm. It can be a radical reformulation of the religious structures surrounding it. To think that early Christianities had no crossover with the Greco-Roman religious cosmovision, in my view, is absurd. In my view, that's absurd. And again, so our early, well, the bulk of our Bible scholars for 2 centuries, one, they're Protestant scholars. And so everything is from a Protestant lens. And thus you can read, none of them believe there are any kind of rituals or secret initiations in early Christianity. There's a couple people who write about that, and they write it off. I think this is completely wrongheaded. The second thing they argue is that it's a Jewish religion, and there's no secret initiations in Judaism, as if we understood what the temple was or what occurred there. And when you read the Essenes with all their purification rituals and their seasonal liturgies, you know, they had a 13-week seasonal liturgy where the high priest every Sabbath sings a song and then tours the heavens. He journeys to the heavenly temple where there are 7 angelic ministers who guard the 7 gates of the 7 heavens. This is the intellectual and religious milieu of the day, right? We get parallels that are different, but this is happening in the Greco-Roman mysteries. It's again this bringing down the heavens to earth and getting the soul to the heavens, the heliocentric soul, the heliocentric cosmos. So we find that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we're not Enoch. Enoch is a late text, but when all references to Enoch, the story of Enoch is the heavenly journey. He ascends to the heavens, discovers the nature of the heavens, sees the creation, sees the flood, sees the keys of the heavens, and comes back to earth with those keys. Right? It's again partaking in the same intellectual and religious milieu of the day. And in my view, this is where we get the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation begins with, the 7 cities, but again, Protestant interpreters have, they link it to the literal cities without realizing this is astronomical imagery of the 7 heavens that one must journey through to get to the throne of God, which is where the high priest ends up in chapter 4, 5, 6 of Revelation. The 24 elders circle the throne, the cherubim is there, there's a song and dance, and one is at the center of the cosmos, center of the heavens. Well, that's it. And by the way, the book of Revelation in the New Testament is the only book that comes with a curse saying, do not add to this book, right? And of course, the evangelicals say that means the New Testament, but it's just speaking of the book of Revelation. And what that means is, when it was written, it was already considered canon, right? They were more familiar with what was going on in the book of Revelation than, it took them another 3 centuries to argue the rest of the canon. But Revelation started with canon. And so we're in a different thought world, because who the hell knows what the book of Revelation means, right? And they think it's about the second coming and the apocalypse, but it's about eschatological time. It's about the heliocentric soul rising up to the eternal realm outside of this existence, to the throne of heaven, guarded by the cherubim, where God dwells. So we don't, I don't think it has anything to do with World War III or nuclear war. It's dealing with this same thought world that they are living in. So if I could, I don't know, how much time do we got?
Unlimited. I thought we were doing a 24-hour marathon here.
Nouveau plan is coming together. By the end of this, I will have all your followers paying me $19.95 a month for the secrets of the universe.
That's a good deal. That's maybe that's sounds like a religion for the poor, right? And it includes how high do you get with the $19? Is it like the third heaven or?
Oh no, you just get the ticket into purgatory.
Well,
If you want to
that's
get
a
to
start.
heaven, you got to go with the gold plane. It's $99.95 a month, but it comes with a cooler and a hat.
I mean, but I don't imagine you'd include hallucinogens in the
Oh,
in that
I
initiatory.
can't say this online. That's in the mailer.
All right.
I don't know how much of this I want. This is a article I wrote in a journal about early Christianity and the mysteries. In my argument, so we have very little to go on. And by the way, probably the best scholar, I think, to sort of track the thought world of the first, second century Christianities is the work of Margaret Barker. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I've heard the name, but I'm not.
On your show, she's out of England, and she just basically tracks the temple cult of Israel through Judaism into early Christianity. And if you're dealing with a temple cult, you're dealing with cosmology, linking heaven and earth, and the access to heaven by the high priest. That is what the temple space allows you to do. It's the axis mundi that allows the high priest to enter the heavenly realm. You know, when he came to the Holy of Holies, there was the veil, the Wilon. He had to change his clothes. It was guarded by the cherubim, which are astronomical images. You cross the veil, and there's the throne of God, and the candlestick, the menorah, the 7-sticked candlestick representing the 7 heavens, that all these other systems travel through in order to get to the throne of God or to the Eleusinian fields. We're in the same thought world. This is the cosmology of the time. It's the cultural imagination of all these systems, and we have forgotten it. It's been dropped. And so reconstructing it with our 17 fractal pieces is very difficult. And for the first 2 centuries, Protestant Bible scholars ignored it. And so, and I think that is a huge error. Here's my take on it. I don't know how much it's like 2 pages. I don't want to read that. The birth of Christianity coincides within the cusp of cultural change where oral cosmology, this is what we're talking about, linking heaven and earth in the heliocentric soul, and liturgy were transmuting into a fully literate canon. The question is, did early Christianity have roots within the older order of religion? Was early Christianity principally liturgical and cosmological in its sensibilities? Or was it from the beginning a historical and textual affair? You know, where the gospel's just giving you the facts of what really happened to Jesus. And, you know, is that all that it is? Mm-hmm. Did early Christianity possess mysteries, as in secret initiations of the anointed? And were these initiations linked with the heavenly spheres? Or was the grace of God contained only in the printed word of God, where the Spirit replaced all heavenly liturgies with insightful scripture quotes? There is reason to believe that at least in the first century, Christians had far more in common with the pagans in this regard. So here's, I will try to summarize. Well, let me read this. Emphatically, Jesus Christ never wrote any of his teachings down. He taught by telling oral stories. Of course, most of his audience could not read or write, so speaking in parables turned out to be the best form of teaching to non-literate peoples. Something is deeply amiss in this practical assessment, however, for Christ himself explained to his disciples, quote, "Unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables," end quote. That's Mark 4:11. This statement suggests that the oral stories Jesus told were a metaphor for the mysterion, a secret revealed only to the acolytes who had been ritually initiated. The very word mystery held deep liturgical connotations central to ancient religious practices. I'm just going to read a couple more paragraphs. Do you mind?
No.
Ask questions if you need to. Numerous scholars have scoffed at the notion of secret rituals behind the Christian message, but oral and semi-literate cultures are orthopraxic. Now, here's my argument. In such cultures, the word of God turns out not to be the written word, but rather the spoken and enacted word. Centuries of literate biblical exegesis seems to have blurred the reality that non-literate peoples must perform their religious beliefs as the only real way of conceptualizing them. Why are rituals not prominent in the surviving texts? Problematically, ritual initiation was sacrosanct, and there were terrible taboos against writing about sacred liturgies. Clement of Alexandria insists that the most sacred things of deity were kept oral and could never be written down. The center of ancient religious practice was never textual. If this was true for early Christianity, then the reality is rituals were not only a necessary part of the new religion, but most likely the foundation of its very ethos, a part that never makes it into the New Testament. So my argument is look, Christianity is the birth of the literate religion. It's the first world religion that begins with the management of texts, that has a textual canon. That is something new, and it changes everything. And what we have forgotten is that 99% of human history, religion was not textual. It was ritual and cosmological, right? And this is true of the Israelites. How is Israel founded? Jacob goes to a river, he fights an angel all night, and with the rising of the sun, he ascends to the throne of God, right? The ladder of Jacob, the ladder of heaven, where he ascends to the heavens, and where he gets a new name, Israel, struggle with God. Well, this is, again, the same thought world that we find in these other practices, bringing heaven and earth together. But my point is that in oral or pre-literate societies, so, in early Christianity, you have probably 10% of the people who can read or write that are Christian. Now, actually, early Christianity is dominated by literate scribes, the bishops, the priests. This is what makes it a literate religion. We have to, and this process began with Judaism. Judaism's temple cult is sacked by Nebuchadnezzar 587 BCE. Hundreds of thousands of Jews are killed, and hundreds of thousands more are exported into Babylon as slaves. They stay there 70 years or so until Cyrus the Persian says, okay, I'm releasing you. Go back home, rebuild your temple, rebuild your life. And so they return. And when they return, they don't rebuild the temple, they write the Torah. Right? They make their religion a text. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't rituals going on, but this is a radical shift in the religious cosmovision. We are now going to, like our temple was a tent that traveled around with us. Well, you know what? We're going to make our entire religion a text that we can travel with. So it is the conversion of the hieratic, theocratic temple cult as religion, which is what everyone else is doing, which everyone does, into textual religion. And it takes centuries from there to develop Christianity, which begins as a textual religion. Okay. But still, when 10% of when 90% of your congregants do not read or write, they still have to perform their religion in order to conceptualize it, in order to know it, right? And this is why these societies are orthopraxic. They root their religion in ritual acts because that's how they live it and learn it. It takes a higher degree of literacy to replace that with orthodoxy, where you're reading a text, and that's how you live and learn your religion. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of like, what do we want to say? The written text was kind of like the fallback.
That's correct.
But now we just have the fallback. We don't have
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. I mean, this process, actually ancient texts like the pyramid texts or the Rig Veda in India are not texts per se, they're rituals. Often the texts are written as if there are two or more dramatic personae, people performing a ritual drama. In fact, our word drama is Greek. It means to act. And it comes from the word drominon, which means to act in a ritual. The Greek plays descended from the Greek temples where the priests and priestesses were doing rituals. And then it turned into, which included dramas, actual plays or initiations where the initiate played the role of the deceased. The priests or priestesses played the role of the deities, and they acted out how salvation would work, right? And so that descends into the Greek drama, where we now get tragedies and comedies. And so that's an innovation, but the source of it is the temple cult, right? So, but the earliest texts then are ritual texts, and these mythological narratives are just the narrative part associated with a grand ritual cycle that's going on. But by the time we get the text, we've lost all the ritual. We've lost all the temple space. We've lost the cosmological thinking behind it. We just now have these gibberish, childish, mythological tales. And so, and so what is that? Well, we don't know, because the main context of the early texts was the ritual. So Judaism and Christianity changes that. They now want to rewrite the ritual as a text where you meditate on the text. And this starts happening not just in Judaism and Christianity, it starts happening in Buddhism. Confucius, about 6th century BCE, we start getting literate forms of religiosity where you now get wisdom texts. I mean, these go back earlier, but the fabric of religion is changing into a literate world. And that's because there's new innovations. There are now alphabets that are phonetic, right? Egyptian hieroglyphs or cuneiform wedges, there's hundreds of characters. It's a full-time job to learn the language, and they're being written only in service of the state and the temple cult. But now if I invent an alphabet that's less than 30 characters, including vowel representations, it's now quite easy to learn writing. And that also rewires the brain. I don't want to get into that, but there is a transition that's happening in the first millennium BCE where religion starts becoming textual, and Judaism and Christianity capitalize on it. And so the whole question is, first century, second century Christianity, were they still practicing these rituals, the journey to the heaven, or this is what was common? This is how people understood the divine. So are we going to completely cut that off and just have a moral, ethical story of Jesus, the dying, resurrecting God, the Gospels and the letters of Paul? Is all that other stuff going away? My argument is no, it doesn't go away. In order to make that argument, I have to cite apocryphal literature, the Acts of John, the Acts of Paul, where we find liturgical initiations going on. There are dances that are occurring, some with the apostles, some with Mary. There is a curious scene in the Gnostic text of the Acts of St. John where Jesus gathers his disciples right before his crucifixion and performs a ritual. The disciples surrounding Jesus in a ring dance, while Jesus himself sings, "Grace danceth, I would pipe, dance ye all, the whole on high hath part in our dancing, and whoso danceth not, knoweth not what cometh to pass. Away am I to thee, wayfarer, behold thyself in me who speak, and seeing what I do, keep silence about my mysteries." End quote. Jesus performs an initiatory song and dance and declares that the heavens take part in the dancing. Furthermore, the grace Jesus offers from the cross is contained in a dance. Somehow, this ritual dance held esoteric information, for Jesus calls this dance a mystery. One scholar observes of this scene, this strange chorea mystica, this ecstatic cult dance, is as ancient as the form of the dance mystery itself. In the Miamot Papyrus, we read, "Come to me, thou who art greatest in heaven, to whom heaven was given for a dancing round. Enraptured by hymn and dance, the Mysti circle through the gates of initiation." In all the Greco-Roman mystery cults, the central liturgy is a dance. In fact, in the Samothrace mysteries, the temple, what was left of it, the outside frieze is a ring of dancers. And so you are initiated by performing a dance. Well, this dance shows up in the Acts of St. John, which Jesus calls a mystery, in which one receives the grace of the cross by doing this dance. Then we have the Acts of St. Thomas, where Thomas sings about Sophia, who makes signs and secret patterns proclaiming the dance of the blessed aeons, and who is herself surrounded by 7 bridesmaids who are performing a ring dance around her. Lucian states that dance and initiation were wed in every single Greco-Roman mystery tradition, and I've shown that these choral dances allowed neophytes to reenact the passage through the heavens of the pagan cosmos. The Orthodox and literate Christian will object to these Gnostic sources, but these texts find a remarkable parallel in the New Testament book of Revelation. Gottfried Szymanowski notes that in chapters 4 and 5 of that book, we are introduced into a heavenly liturgy where the anointed ones, clothed in white garments and wearing gold crowns, circle the heavenly throne while singing hymns. The purpose of this ring dance is to draw the earthly community into the heavenly praise of God, a liturgy that is closed with the Amen sung by the inner circle before the heavenly throne. So it shows up in the one canonical text, the book of Revelation, but it's very muted. It's symbolic. It's in metaphor. But we have this ring dance around the throne of God, and that's what we have in all the Greco-Roman mysteries. That's what we have in the Gnostic texts of the Acts of St. John, the Acts of St. Thomas. And then, I go through and I quote the Didache, some of the early Christian fathers who talk about ritual initiatory dances in the early liturgy of the Christian church. So the references are sparse, but they exist, and they show us that, in fact, there were ritual initiations going on. How widespread, amongst who, don't know. They include some sort of liturgical dance. They show up in Gnostic apocryphal texts and segments in the book of Revelation.
Interesting. You wonder if we could almost, and I'm sure it's been done, go through the epistles and the gospels and like really look hard for even the craziest reference that we can find to something like that.
I think most of it was stripped out. I think that one, it was prohibited from being written at all. I mean, Clement says the sacred things of deity are to be kept oral and never to be written down. So you have to understand, and this was true of the mysteries. The reason why we don't get any writings of what was going on in the mysteries is it was prohibited. If you did it, you could be executed. Your mystery would be negated. You would be sentenced to hell forever, right? I mean, huge taboos. It was considered so sacred. And as a result, we have no writing. We have no writing of the 1st, 2nd century Christians, just little pieces. So, and when they composed the New Testament, I think whatever was there, I mean, what we get, it's been sloughed out. So, I mean, we have Jesus saying, "Unto you the mysteries are told." We have the book of Revelation. We have, an obscure reference to the 3 heavens in Corinthians. We have, in Corinthians also a reference to baptism for the dead. We have,
which is yeah, that's beyond interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
Like, there's some, like, most churches don't want to touch baptism for the dead, right? Or there's also an interesting reference to spirit prison with Paul.
yeah,
And he knows a guy who went up to the third heaven.
right.
But I guess no extant religions or churches touch on those items, do they?
No. I mean, well, Mormonism.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was.
Dead.
Yeah.
But I don't know of any Christian church other than Mormonism that does anything like that. So what is that? What is that? Because it is referenced in the New Testament.
Yeah, and you wonder why they don't want to touch that, because then you kind of go down a rabbit hole with, and most people aren't willing to go down that with. Well, you wonder how we got to orthodoxy where we don't really touch that, in our theology.
Well, there it is, and again, a lot of these pagan systems, they all had ancestor cults, and you not only did initiations for yourself, but you had an ancestor cult where you served the dead, you ate with the dead, you performed rituals because your ancestors gave you power in this life, and you would become an ancestor and you would give the next generation power. That was all part of the religious cosmovision. And so doing some ritual for your ancestor was very common. And so when we get a reference for baptism of the dead, there it is. That's a ritual for an ancestor. That sounds so strange and absurd to us today, but that would have been commonplace in that thought world in the first century CE. So, but where did that come from, and where did it go? And there are three heavens. Where are they? And where did they go?
Yeah, or I mean, at least three heavens, right? Like,
the cosmology of early Christianity is this older cosmology. It's not Ptolemaic. Every cosmological, we get the three heavens, we get the whole revelation, ascending to the throne of God. This is all older cosmology. This is that heliocentric soul cosmology, right? The Philolos cosmology. It's not Ptolemaic it's not geocentrism.
Mm-hmm.
So the cosmology of the New Testament has its feet in the older cosmology. However, it has its religiosity in the new literate religion, where we're going to drop the cosmology and practice our religion through a text, through keeping the commandments, through very nominal rituals, baptism, basically it.
Yeah,
communion.
Seems less fun, doesn't it? You wonder if we're going to bring the fun back. Like, I don't know.
Well, the Protestants did introduce a rock band that you could sing to every song.
Yeah, there's a silver lining, right?
Yeah, silver lining.
Yeah. So you wonder, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of crazy talk, where if you could look at, if there are extant religions with like a salvific dance, kind of like we look back and just see maybe there's something Jungian, just something in us with the ancient mystery, like the prehistoric mysteries, right? And then we kind of see it repeating through time. If we could look at examples of other initiatory dances, but I get they never wrote them down, right? And if we could maybe use that to reconstruct it, but they didn't write it. And why? You'd think, why not write it? Like, it's incredibly important, right? You write down important things, right? They just, why would, like, what's wrong with that? Shouldn't everybody be saved and go up to the highest heaven they can? Or,
well, again, this religious vision emerges out of orality. Writing is invented 3200, 3400 BCE. It pops up in a half dozen places within a century or two of each other.
mm-hmm.
But it takes about 3,000 years for full literacy to develop. During that 3,000 years, the writing of the Egyptians and the Akkadians and the Sumerians, most of the clay tablets are actually receipts and contracts. It's what you would use writing for, to keep track of stuff, right? But you do have religious writing, and like I say, it's all subtext. They were still doing the rituals and the dances. In oral societies, you perform your memories, and so nothing is written down. You ritualize it, you dance it. There's a Greek fragment, actually. I'm trying to remember the name. But it's really interesting that it's a Greek writer who says the entire doctrine of the Pythagorean school was revealed in a dance. And so all the teachings of Pythagoras, he always begins our history of science textbooks, because he's the first to calculate all the numerics of the harmonic ratios. And he's supposedly the first rationalist separating everything out of the mythological world. I think that's bunk, but again, we have this one fragment, there's one writing of this one author saying the teachings of the Pythagorean school were danced. Now, isn't that interesting? I mean, that is just interesting. And so whatever they were learning, they were dancing, because that's how they learned, right? So the number of steps, the expressions, the melody, whatever it was, that it was a mnemonic system, a memory system that helped them encode what they were remembering. And so this is the way it was done for 99% of human history. This goes back into prehistory. This is what the nomadic hunter-gatherers were doing. And so this lasts all the way until the middle of the first millennium BCE, where we finally now start, instead of 5% of the population reading and writing, we get 10%. And by the Roman Ptolemaic era, in urbanized area, it's about 20%. And that's a tipping point. At 20%, everything's being managed by text now. That didn't happen before. And so, and then all through the Middle Ages, you're between 20 and 40% literacy until basically the invention of the printing press, because it was so expensive to make a manuscript and copy a manuscript. Again, only the royalty had the libraries. I mean, nobody could afford a book. And so this common mass literacy that we live in today is only a few centuries old. And so Protestant theology is all text-based, and we forget that is a relatively recent phenomenon, and that for most of human history, religion was danced and ritualized and cosmologized, and the text is the late end of that. And we're actually, I guess we'll end it here, but I would argue we're actually in a post-literate stage now. Who reads books anymore? A lot of these.
Oh, that's a good point.
A lot of these kids, everything is done on the phone, email, texting, surfing, multitasking, but it's all online, and it's. So
TikTok, everybody's doing their dances. I bet it's ripe for a church on TikTok. We're going to come full circle.
If there isn't a TikTok church, then people are failing. Hey, that's what we should do. $99.95 a month.
There you go. And, we'll just have to say on the record, there's no hallucinogenics. There's no mystery box.
Yes, on the record.
Right? Yep. But that's brilliant. I'm going to start my cult maybe as soon as we get off here on TikTok. But for $99.99, you can get to the seventh heaven.
That's correct.
But we only talk about publicly, except for right now, about the third heaven. But we'll just let you in right now. There's 7. So full immortality. But
full immortality.
Yeah, but you have to die. You have to die a subscriber. We don't want you to, just.
It's a lifetime subscription.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah. Then because a good the main thing with a cult to keep the money coming in, you have your followers alive, right? So, we don't
Yes.
want to encourage them to buy the subscription and then, then ascend too quickly,
Though you could, put us in your will.
Even better.
Even better,
Yep.
right? There might be an eighth heaven.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, got to keep going. Keep that.
That's right.
Yep, and we're just like Clement, like in the Marsaba letter, even under oath, you still deny it, the existence of the eighth heaven. So right now, I swear there's nothing to this eighth heaven thing. But
I'll let you come up with the name of our religion.
But for a one-time fee of $200,
there you go.
Yep. Good time.
I think we've got it down. I think we can do this.
Yep, let's do it. All right. Well, we'll end it there. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. That it's incredibly interesting. I don't know if I've heard much of that before. So that's very insightful.
Well, it was fun. I'll have to go look up Mithraism vegetarianism. So,
yep. Well, you heard it here.
I learned something. So,
yep. Dr. Lundwall is going vegan. You heard it here first.
Hell no.
Yep. All right. Well, to get to the eighth heaven, you have to be vegan. So, but
oh man.
That's a higher level initiative.
Already there's a schism in our religion.
Oh no. But Dr. Lundwall is an apostate. Don't follow him. So yep.
That's the way it all goes.
His sect bathes in the blood of the bull. So
that's correct.
That's crazy talk. All right. Thanks so much. We'll let you go. And hopefully we'll talk to you again.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Elliot.